In the early part of the 18th century, German migrants began to settle around Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They brought with them a heavy, short-barreled hunting rifle called the Jaeger. The word Jaeger means hunter. The rifle was accurate, but it was adapted for hunting larger game in Europe than would be required in this country. It frequently had a bore of 5800ths or 6800ths of an inch. Furthermore, the large bore required more powder and lead shot, two components which were in short supply in the colony. The resulting rifle, which was evolved from the Jaeger, had a longer barrel to ensure the complete burning of the powder, and a smaller bore, 3600ths to 4500ths caliber, which was sufficient for their purposes and saved lead. The first rifles made by the German gunsmiths in Pennsylvania were exactly the same as those they had made at home. During the second quarter of the 18th century, however, the evolution became more and more noticeable. By 1750, the true American rifle had developed. The next 60 years saw the rifle reach its highest peak, both in performance and design. The stock became lighter and much more graceful as it developed a sweeping drop in the butt. Inlays began to appear of brass, pewter, and silver, and the patchbox became more elaborate. With such an excellent rifle and such constant practice, fine marksmanship became commonplace. Shooting matches were held, and prizes of turkeys and cuts of beef were offered. Although some of these fine rifles saw action in the French and Indian War, it was not until the outbreak of the Revolution that it was given an opportunity to prove itself. The principal weapon of the Revolution was the musket, a large calibered and smooth bore which could be loaded faster than a rifle. Furthermore, they could be fitted with bayonets. Although companies of riflemen scored victories at Saratoga, Cowpens, and Kings Mountain, the musket was the workhorse of the Revolution. The accuracy of the Pennsylvania rifle was almost unbelievable. There are authentic reports of men being shot at range of 300 to 400 yards. These were instances where the one shot was the only one at the target, so it was not just a case of chance. Accuracy was dependent upon many factors, but it finally boiled down to a careful coordination between the rifle and the marksman. The rifle was loaded by carefully introducing into the muzzle of the rifle a previously measured amount of black powder. The amount required had been accurately determined by the marksman by shooting his rifle over the snow and checking the surface of the snow for unburned grains of powder. The idea was to use just enough powder to propel the bullet the necessary distance. Unburnt powder meant waste, and not enough meant loss of accuracy. Now a greased cloth patch was placed over the muzzle, and the round lead ball of the proper size of the bore placed on it, and the ball driven into the muzzle. The barrel, the excess cloth was trimmed from around the muzzle, and the ball rammed down the barrel until it reached the powder. The grease patch served several functions. As it was rammed down the barrel with the ball, it cleared the barrel of scattered grains of powder, as well as the residue of the previous shot. The principal function was to permit a closer fit between the riflings of the barrel and the ball. A small amount of fine priming powder was placed in the pan, and the frizzen closed down over the span. The hammer was kept at half cock as a safety measure. The weapon was now ready to fire when the hammer was brought back to full cock. The flintlock pistol. Loading the flintlock rifle took time, and no matter how proficient the frontiersman was, the best he could do would be to get off 3 or 4 shots a minute. If he missed his first shot, he was in trouble. The savage or the bear could quickly close in on him and attack. For this reason, many hunters carried a pistol in their belt for such an emergency. The pistol was also the flintlock type of a caliber somewhat larger than the rifle, usually 50-hundreds to 58-hundreds with a barrel length of 10 to 12 inches. For close fighting, this weapon could be deadly. Its accuracy was limited, however, partly because of the short sighting radius and partly because of the difficulty to steady the aim. Many of these pistols were produced by local gunsmiths, as were the rifles. The Kentucky pistol became a tradition, and collectors place a high value on an authentic Kentucky pistol. The knife and the tomahawk. The knife was not only a weapon for close-in fighting, but it was an indispensable tool and implement of the mountain man. He used it for skinning his catch of fur bearers, for cutting saplings and branches for his shelter, for scalping his Indian victims, for cleaning and cutting his game into smaller portions, to mention a few of its many uses. The knife was usually carried in a fringed buckskin sheath attached to his belt on the left side, out of the way of the bullet pouch and powder horn, which were usually worn on the right side. The blade was heavy, about 10 inches long, and with a very fine edge. Mountain men practiced throwing their knives, and many became very adept at his art. Throwing the knife was resorted to when the element of surprise was important, and to fire the rifle would be to disclose one's presence. It was used in hand-to-hand combat after the rifle became useless. The tomahawk was the white man's contribution to Indian weaponry. The Indian had his battle axe, which was a heavy stone fastened at the split end of a stick and tied tightly with wet buckskin. When the buckskin dried, the stone was held securely in the handle. The tomahawk of the white man was a small-handled axe. It was light in weight and thus provided no burden to the many other implements carried by the frontiersmen. The Indian envisioned its potential and offered many skins in trade. A good tomahawk could bring several beaver skins. The Indians called it a tomahawk, which literally means cutting edge. While the Indian used it to cut saplings for his wigwam, he frequently put it to more deadly use in combat. Many a settler's head has been split from the blow of the tomahawk in the hands of a savage. While throwing the tomahawk is mentioned frequently in stories of Indians, it is doubtful if the Indian threw it in defense or offense. In the heat of battle, it may have slipped from the hand as the owner swung it. Few frontiersmen wanted to part with the tomahawk or risk losing it when thrown. It was too valuable in close combat. His clothing and accoutrements. The frontiersman on television or in the movies is usually pictured in fringed buckskin, moccasins, fur cap, as well as other articles of dress. This was the traditional garb of the trapper, scout, Indian fighter, or hunter. Buckskin was the hide of the deer with the hair removed. It was soft, pliable, and warm. Furthermore, it was easily obtainable when in the wilderness. It bore well and withstood the friction with the branches, briars, and other obstacles. The shirt was usually slipped over the head with the chest partly open with laces to close it if necessary. It contained no pockets. Occasionally a vest was worn open or a coat style which could be closed with buttons. The shirt or coat was usually worn in a length almost to the knee. The fringe along the sleeve and across the back must have been adapted from the Indian style. The Indian decorated his clothing with many ornaments, such as shells, bear claws, tusks of animals, porcupine quills, and later, after the coming of the white man, with brightly colored trade beads. The frontiersmen also used these ornaments. Bracelets and necklaces were worn by men as well as women. plant dyes were used in intricate designs. Cloth woven from linen and wool also served for shirts and breeches. These linsey woolsies were usually worn around the home, to church, and to social gatherings. One item of apparel was the traditional hunting shirt or rifle blouse. It was a cloth coat of knee length, fringed down the front as well as along the sleeves and the yoke across the back. It was usually dyed a bright color such as yellow, blue, or green. It was worn in the field, the woods, to church, and to dances on Saturday night. It was a poor man, indeed, who did not have at least two of these hunting shirts. The obverse side of the state seal of West Virginia contains, in the center, a rock covered with ivy. To the right of this rock is a farmer clothed in traditional hunting shirt. Such was the popularity of this garment that it was included in our state seal. The hunter, trapper, and scout wore moccasins with buckskin breeches and or leggings. They were frequently decorated with beads. The breeches usually had pockets. The leggings and breeches were also fringed. Headgear was somewhat more varied. The early settler brought with him the high-crowned, broad-brimmed black hat. When this wore out, or he traded it or lost it to an Indian, he replaced it with a fur cap made from the skin of an animal such as a fox or wolf. The term accoutrements has several connotations. It was formerly used to include those sidearms and necessary implements of the soldier. In its broader sense, it was taken to include all those necessary articles which were worn by the frontiersman into the wilderness. His wide leather belt held his shirt closed if it were open in front. It also held his knife and his tomahawk. If he were so affluent to have a pistol, it was also stuck in his belt. Over his shoulder he carried a leather bag or pouch. It is sometimes referred to as a bullet pouch, but more often was called a grab bag because it held just about whatever the hunter carried, as his coat had no pockets. The grab bag held his lead bullets, maybe a quid of tobacco, some parched corn and jerky, some salt, cloth patches for his bullets, and some extra flints. Slung over the same shoulder and riding alongside the grab bag was his powder horn, which contained his supply of black powder. Attached to the strap of the powder horn was a powder measure made from a piece of deer horn and hollowed out to hold the exact amount of powder for a charge for his own rifle. Occasionally, a smaller horn, which held the priming powder for the pan of his rifle, was carried along with the larger powder horn. If he planned to be away from home or from his base of operations for an extended time, he had to carry an extra supply of lead. He had to, with a bullet mold to form his bullets. Tools needed to keep his rifle in operating condition included a worm, somewhat like a corkscrew, which could be fastened to the end of his ramrod to extract a lead ball from the barrel if it stuck there. He also carried a priming wire and brush to keep the touch hole in the barrel clean.